She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply grabbed her bag, locked the door from the outside, and vanished, leaving him behind with 3 children asleep on the living room floor, curled under worn blankets and deflated pillows, a pile of unpaid bills stacked on the cracked Formica table. In the middle of it, a note scribbled in haste, like a punch to the chest. "I'm done living with a loser. I want a real life." He read it with trembling hands, his heart trying to deny what his eyes already knew. She was gone. No warning, no fight, not even a backward glance. And with her, she took the last fragile hope of a complete home. The house, once alive with TV noise, hushed conversations, and the clang of pots on the stove, fell into a cruel silence. He sat down on the torn sofa, looked at his children, and felt the world crumble. He didn't know whether to cry from pain, humiliation, or fear. He picked up the note again, pressed it to his chest, and cried right there, his face buried in hands still stained with cement, trying to muffle the sobs so the children wouldn't wake. She had left with a smooth-talking lawyer, polished suit, sweet promises, and a fantasy life. He was left with shame, abandonment, and the crushing weight of raising 3 children alone, with an empty fridge and a heart in pieces. The next morning, like a machine, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He cared. He reheated rice in hot water, split it into 3 chipped plates, and drank the remaining broth from a cracked glass. He wrapped his injured foot with an old rag and limped to the construction site, pushing past the pain in his leg because the ache in his chest hurt more. When the neighbor asked about his wife, he forced a smile and said, "She went to visit her mother." His chest burned. But he didn't lie out of pride. He lied to protect his kids so no one would see them as the children of a woman who ran away. Weeks passed, slow and merciless. The children's clothes grew tighter, the milk stretched thinner, and he grew smaller, sunken cheeks, cracked hands. But he never complained. Not once. The pain became part of the rhythm, like the clinking spoon in his coffee, or the silence behind the door each night. In the bathroom, he cried into a towel while the children slept. And in their faces, 2 boys and 1 girl, he found a strength he never knew he had. They were too young to understand what they'd lost. And maybe because of that, they gave him exactly what he needed most: unconditional love. At night, while they slept, he would draw blueprints in an old notebook, the house he was building with his own hands. He dreamed of a room for each child, big windows, light walls, a table where they could all sit together and eat. Beside the sketches, he'd scribble survival notes. "This will pass. They need me. One day she'll see." It wasn't revenge. It was survival. Those scribbles kept him breathing, kept hope alive even when everything around him seemed to fall apart. Every bill paid was a small victory. He stuck reward stickers in his notebook like invisible trophies, reminders that he was still in the fight. When food ran low, he got creative, cooking with whatever was left, always serving the kids first. Sometimes he'd have sugar water for dinner and pretend he was full. He never begged, never complained, never gave up. He just kept going, one day after another, with a strength even he didn't know he had. The youngest started asking about her. "Where's Mommy?" he'd ask, eyes wide with curiosity. And the father would smile through the pain, stroke his hair gently and say, "Mommy had to travel, but Daddy's right here." And he was, present in every bath, every hand-washed shirt, every sleepless night on the cold floor. He was there, whole, even in pieces. He made a vow. Those children would never feel the kind of abandonment he felt in that note. Every night spent beside them made him stronger. He had no luxury, no comfort, no applause. But he had what mattered most, the pure, stubborn love of 3 little hearts. That's why he kept going. For them, and quietly, for himself. Without realizing it, the man everyone once called a failure had already begun to transform. The world outside kept overlooking his fight. But inside that small, quiet house, every step, every silent cry, every small act of love was laying the foundation for a comeback no one, not even him, could have imagined. The alarm clock was always the youngest crying, usually around 5 in the morning. He would rise slowly, careful not to wake the other two, pick up the little one in his arms and warm up milk with water, trying to stretch the last bit of powdered formula. There was no time to think, only to act. The routine was raw. Drop the kids off with Miss Carol, the neighbor next door, then rush to the construction site, lift bags, push wheelbarrows, climb scaffolding with a swollen knee. The pain didn't matter. Every hammer swing, every shovel of cement was a reminder that he was still standing. No one saw the effort it took to come home at night and force a tired smile. To cook dinner out of lunch leftovers, tidy up the house, tuck the kids into bed. The world doesn't applaud single fathers, especially not men. But he didn't need applause. He just wanted them to grow up right, to never feel ashamed of the father they had, to never feel unloved, even when everything else was missing. The empty pots hurt, but the fear of failing hurt more, and that's what kept him going. On Sundays, when there was no work, he did the laundry and cleaned the house while the oldest helped hang sheets to dry. They'd sit on the porch floor, invent stories, build castles from pillows, and travel to worlds where he was a king, and they were princes and a princess. He smiled on the outside, but inside he knew it was all make-believe. Still, those little fantasies, as simple as they were, kept his mind from breaking. They were the last breath of a dream that hadn't died, only gone dormant. He started picking up odd jobs at night, painting, small repairs, light renovations. He slept 4 hours a night, sometimes less, but he never missed putting the kids to bed. He kissed each forehead, even if they were already asleep. He'd stand there for a moment, just watching them, remembering they were the reason he didn't fall. The mother's absence, once an open wound, was becoming a scar. Rough, ugly, but a scar. It didn't bleed anymore. It only remembered. People in the neighborhood started to notice. First, the baker extended his tab knowing he'd pay. Then the hardware store owner gave him a discount, seeing the man who never dropped his head. Small gestures. But they meant someone saw, someone recognized. He was no longer just the man whose wife left him. He was becoming the father who fought for his kids, who didn't back down, who made the impossible routine. Bit by bit, his name began to spread. A well-painted wall here, a solid fix there. People didn't choose him for the price, but for his honesty. That was rare. When asked how he managed, he'd smile and say, "I don't have a choice. They depend on me." But deep down, there was a quiet rage, not at the woman who left, but at everything she represented. Running, rejection, the label of failure. He carried that label like a burden, but also like fuel. Eventually, he saved enough to buy more bricks. He started working on the house again, alone at night after a full day's work. The kids watched from the window, excited. "Daddy's building my room," the middle one said, eyes sparkling. And he smiled, despite the fatigue, despite his body begging to rest. Every wall he raised was more than cement. It was rebuilding a life. It was proof, a silent answer to the cruel note she left behind. "Loser," she called him. But there he was, standing, building. The kids' clothes no longer came solely from donations. He bought them, bit by bit, but with pride. A new shirt for the oldest, sneakers for the girl. Every little victory was quietly celebrated, and it hurt less. They began to understand. They asked less about their mother. The oldest knew. The girl felt it. The little one still dreamed, and he prayed, not for her return, but for strength to never give up. Because now he knew she had taken with her the weakest part of his life. One night, as he finished plastering the new bedroom wall, the oldest came in with a sandwich in hand. "We split it and saved you a piece, Dad." He looked at the boy, at that small yet massive gesture, and felt a tear run down his cheek. He was no longer the only one taking care of them. They were taking care of him too. And that was the beginning of a new story. A story just for them, without her, without pain, just with cement, love, and dignity. The house was no longer just a shelter. It was a witness to the fight. Every wall carried a story. Every brick marked a day of pain overcome. He built the children's bedrooms first, even though he still slept on the old mattress in the living room. He wanted them to have privacy, dignity, a space they could truly call home. The kids started doing better in school, laughing more often. The neighbors noticed, and they talked. "That man deserves the world," they'd say. But he didn't want the world. He just wanted to finish what he started. As the months passed, the odd jobs turned into steady work. A fellow worker had recommended him to a small construction company in need of someone trustworthy. The owner, a humble man like him, saw more than muscle. He saw truth in his eyes. Soon he was leading small crews, mentoring young apprentices, helping other single fathers trying to survive. He was respected. And more than that, he was heard. For the first time in his life, his voice carried weight. His children grew up grounded in values. The oldest learned to care for the younger ones with quiet responsibility. The girl, proud and bright, began to shine academically. The youngest, full of energy and sweetness, was the joy of the house. They knew what their father had endured, even if he never told them. They felt it. His silence spoke louder than 1,000 stories. And that silence was changing. It was becoming something beautiful, pride. He didn't speak much, but when he hugged them, it was with his whole soul. When he smiled, the world felt lighter. Stability brought breathing room. He bought their first new fridge, then a small TV. He replaced the borrowed stove with a used one, but it was his. The kids cheered for every victory. "Is it ours, Dad?" they'd ask. And he would always answer with a tired smile and a firm voice. "It's ours." Every corner of the house smelled of triumph. From the hallway to the backyard, everything had been built with sleepless nights, endless days, and unbreakable faith. He didn't have a degree, but he had a doctorate in starting over. Then came the idea that would change everything, starting his own construction business. Small, with just 2 assistants, and a simple name, 3 Pillars, in honor of his children. The plan seemed ambitious for someone who once survived on rice and hot water from the shower. But he believed. And more importantly, his children believed in him. They set up a tiny office on the porch with an old wooden table and a hand-painted sign. It was modest, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The first contract came from a former client who preferred working directly with him. Then came others. Word of mouth spread, and his name became synonymous with quality and honesty. He didn't make much, but he earned it clean. He slept peacefully. He started hiring people from the community, ex-convicts, single dads. He was grateful for life, even with its scars. He didn't want to be rich. He wanted to be useful. And he was. Every family he helped was a silent act of healing for the abandonment he once suffered. The children's education became a top priority. He enrolled the older 2 in classes, encouraged them to read, got an old computer for schoolwork. He made a point to attend parent meetings, to sit at the dinner table. He was father, mother, friend, and guide. The absence of the woman who left no longer hurt. It was just a memory that no longer paralyzed him. He kept walking, steady steps, and the children beside him learned the same lesson. Pain does not define you. How you respond to it does. One day, the girl came home with a drawing. It was him, holding a shovel, wearing a superhero cape. "It's super, Dad," she said. He smiled, holding back tears, and tucked it into his wallet. That was his wealth, not in money, in love. A love that endured abandonment, hunger, exhaustion. A love that built walls, shaped character, and raised lives. That was a real life, not the kind she went chasing. And one day she would come back, to try and reclaim it. And he knew that day would come, not with fear, but with calm. Because the pain she left behind, he had turned it into something greater, stronger, purer. And when she came back, he wouldn't be the man she left behind. He'd be so much more. He'd be the example, and the example does not bow. He was no longer just the man who survived abandonment. He had become a name mentioned at neighborhood meetings, a familiar face to young people searching for direction. The father many called Uncle, though no blood tied them. He began organizing community efforts, rebuilding homes for struggling families, offering jobs to those no one else would hire. People looked at him with respect. but he remained the same. Quiet, humble, always working with his hands and giving fully with his heart. The social project started almost by accident. A neighborhood boy who helped with the construction crew lost his father to alcohol and showed up one day in tears, saying he wanted to give up. Not knowing what to say, he handed the boy a shovel and said, "Let's dig the foundation together. Whatever anger you've got, throw it in here." It became a ritual. More boys came, more stories, more pain. He offered them work, food, someone to listen. No speeches, just presence. What was once an empty shack turned into a support center. It had a makeshift classroom, a small woodworking shop, and a community kitchen. He named it after his children. 3 Pillars Project, building with love. The community embraced it. Mothers brought homemade cakes. Fathers volunteered on weekends. And he watched it all with the eyes of someone who had lost much, but never lost faith in starting again. It wasn't just construction anymore. It was healing. His daughter began offering tutoring at the center. She had the gift of speech, the spark of leadership. The boys helped with repairs, upkeep, and workshops. The home he once began building alone had become a beacon in the neighborhood. Local papers came to interview him. Politicians tried to get close. But he always held to the core. No one was there for vanity. They were there for need, for truth, for hope. That was what gave it power. One night, after a community event, he sat on the steps of the house looking up at the stars. The silence was different now. It didn't hurt. It was peace. His eldest son sat beside him and asked, "Dad, do you think she'll ever come back?" He looked at his son, took a deep breath, and replied, "Maybe, but we've come too far to look back now." The boy nodded. He knew his father didn't hold hatred, but he also knew that forgiveness wasn't return. It was release. The kids in the neighborhood called him Mr. Stone. It was his last name, but it was also a metaphor. He was the stone that held it all together, that anchored things when everything else threatened to collapse. He didn't preach, but every act of his was a lesson. Every helping hand was a seed, and those seeds sprouted, grew, spread. He was shaping a generation, not with words, but with action, and no one could erase that. His children were teenagers now, and not one trace of bitterness lived in them. There was strength, respect, compassion. He had done it, alone, against all odds. He had raised 3 extraordinary human beings in a world built to break them. When he thought of the woman who had left them, he no longer felt anger. He felt pity. She hadn't seen this happen. She hadn't witnessed the first steps, the first report cards, the first victories. She chose not to be part of it, and that was the greatest punishment. He began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, give interviews. He would go in a plain shirt, speak slowly, without rehearsed lines. He told his story just as it was, hard, raw, full of falls, and full of rising again. He spoke about being a man in hard times, about being a father when pain is stronger than courage, and people listened in silence, because his voice was low, but it carried more power than any scream. It was the voice of someone who had lived, and won. Then came the news. He was to be honored as the city's Citizen of the Year. A public ceremony, a plaque, a speech. He didn't want to go, thought it was too much, but the kids insisted. "It's our story too, Dad." So he gave in, wore his best shirt, combed his hair at the sink, and went, holding his children's hands, head held high, unaware that on that very same day she would return. She stepped off the bus with hollow eyes and a soul scraped clean. A cloth bag hung from her shoulder, and her coat, worn and frayed, barely kept the wind out. One heel was broken, her hair pulled back in a careless knot, her face swollen from sleepless nights. The lawyer who once promised her the world had vanished without a trace. All those promises of wealth had turned into eviction notices, unpaid bills, and betrayals. She was alone, no home, no direction, no pride. All she had left was the memory of the home she once rejected. She walked the old neighborhood with uncertain steps. The houses had changed, the people had changed. But one thing remained, the house, or what used to be one, Now it was a community center. There were signs, children playing in the yard, people coming and going with joy on their faces. On the gate, a hand-painted sign read, 3 Pillars Project, Building with Love. She stopped, read it silently, and felt the ground sway beneath her. It was his. The losers. She slipped in unnoticed, watched the movement from afar. In the courtyard, she saw 3 young adults speaking to an older woman. She recognized them instantly. Her children, grown, beautiful, strong. She tried to call out, but no sound came. Her legs buckled. She remembered the day she left, the note, the locked door, the children sleeping on the floor, the man with cement-stained hands. And now, it was she who trembled. She who didn't know where to step. She who had nowhere left to fall. She learned about the ceremony from a neighbor who didn't recognize her right away. Mr. Stone is being honored tonight. He's become the pride of the city, sweetheart. She smiled without showing her teeth, waited for night to fall, then made her way to the auditorium. She sat in the back row, hidden among strangers, and when they called his name, she could barely breathe. There he was, gray hair, steady eyes, a calm smile, and beside him, his children, standing tall, standing with him. His speech was short, but every word hit like a stone. I didn't do any of this alone. I had the help of my kids, this community and people who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Applause. He held the plaque, his eyes misted with tears. They called me a failure. Today I'm just a father who did what needed to be done. She felt the floor vanish beneath her. It was meant for her. It was as if he were reading that note back aloud. But now, in front of everyone, she waited for the crowd to clear, then slowly approached. The children saw her first. The girl froze. The eldest frowned. The youngest looked down. She stood before them, trembling, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know. I was wrong. Please, forgive me. Silence. Crushing. Undeniable. People stepped back. Then he came. Last. His steps slow. His gaze steady. He looked her in the eye. And without anger, only with the dignity of someone who had already won, he said, "You left me with what was most valuable." She choked back tears, tried to reach for his arm, but he gently pulled back. "The pain you gave me, I used to grow, and these 3 became my treasure." Her eyes flooded. Her body trembled. She wanted to ask for forgiveness, to embrace him, to go back, but he gave her nothing more than those words. "You became a lesson, and I became everything you never believed I could be." Silence. Heavy. Final. The kind of silence that locks doors. Forever. He turned, embraced his children, and walked away. She collapsed to her knees right there, in the wreckage of what once was hope. No one lifted her. No one offered comfort, because in that moment, there was no place left for her. Not in that world. Not in that story. And she understood. Too late. But she understood. She remained there on her knees, on the cold concrete outside the auditorium, while the city continued to celebrate the man she once abandoned. The lights dimmed, the cars drove off, the voices faded into the night. But she didn't move, as if she was still waiting for it all to be just a nightmare, for him to return, reach out a hand, say it could all still be different. But no one came back. Not him. Not the children. The world she had once thrown away had moved on without her, and that was the most unbearable pain of all. With no money, no home, and no dignity left, she began sleeping in a filthy boarding house in the next neighborhood. By day, she wandered the streets, looking for small jobs, a bit of kindness, a glance of compassion. No one recognized the woman who once wore heels, makeup, and expensive perfume. Now she smelled of mildew and regret. She tried to find old acquaintances, but they had all vanished. Or worse, they knew who she was and looked away. The abandonment she inflicted had come back doubled. She was alone, invisible, broken. One afternoon, tired and hungry, she passed in front of the project. Children played, teenagers worked, music and laughter filled the air. A sharp pain struck her chest. That was supposed to be hers too. That was the future she had walked away from. She stood across the street, watching like someone peering into a parallel world. Her children were there, grown, smiling, alive, and she, outside that world, aged and forgotten. She tried to wave, to call, but no one responded. They just kept going, because she now no longer belonged. One day, in despair, she knocked on the gate of the center. It was her daughter who answered. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time stood still. The mother spoke, barely a whisper. "Sweetheart, I'm sick. I have no place to stay, no one. I just wanted to see you, talk to you." The girl, now nearly a woman, took a deep breath, looked her straight in the eye and said, "We grew up without you. We learned how to live with what was left." Then she closed the gate, not out of hatred, but with sadness, and with a maturity no child should have to carry. She sat on the curb and cried until her eyes were dry. For days, she replayed that moment in her mind, trying to understand where it all went wrong. But the truth was simple. She chose to leave, chose to reject the home, the man, the children, and now, no one could choose forgiveness for her. Too late. Time, that silent judge, had already ruled, and the sentence was clear. She was no longer part of the story, not even as a good memory, only as a warning. Inside the project, the children didn't celebrate her fall. There was no hatred there, only the strength of those forced to grow up too soon. When the father heard about the visit, he simply nodded. He asked no questions. He didn't want to know. She made her choice. Now it's our turn to choose. And they chose to move forward, to love, to build, to protect, to leave the past where it belonged. The entire neighborhood knew the story now. Some felt pity for her. Others said she had it coming. But the father never spoke of it, never mocked, never exposed. He just kept being who he always had been. Steady, present, quiet. He understood that revenge isn't loud. It's absence. It's moving forward with such dignity that the other person drowns in their own regret. And that's what he did. With every step, every project, every smile from his children, he got his revenge. With grace. She tried a few more times. Letters, messages, hours waiting by the gate. She was never turned away, but never welcomed either. And time, merciless, swept away any last hope of return. It was no longer rejection. It was consequence. And when she finally understood that, she stopped trying. She began to fade from the streets, from memory, from conversation. She became a shadow, an echo, an absence. And in the depths of abandonment, she discovered that some wounds never heal. They're simply carried. Meanwhile, the house kept growing. The project gained new rooms, new support, new stories. And at the center of it all, always him, silent, working, with the steady gaze of a man who had once been called a failure, and who answered with life. At the entrance of the center, the new facade told its own story. Murals painted by children covered the walls with bold, heartfelt phrases like, "Here we learn never to give up," and "Love builds more than cement." Beneath them, in smaller letters, the names of his 3 children were inscribed. It was living proof of what he had built with his own hands, and with a heart that refused to harden. Every nail driven was a defiance of pain. Every wall raised was a silent scream against the abandonment he had endured. The community knew it, and they honored him for it. Visitors increased. Schools sent field trips. Universities wanted to study the model of inclusion. Major newspapers from the capital published features, but he remained unchanged. Plain shirt, calm gaze, quiet speech. He wasn't after recognition, he was after transformation. And he found it in the sparkle in the eyes of the teens in the workshop, in the gratitude of the mothers given a second chance, and in his children, who had become reflections of everything he fought to protect. Dignity, kindness, strength. His eldest got into engineering school on a full scholarship, pure merit. In his freshman address, he said, "My dad didn't just build houses, he built people. And if I'm here today, it's because I had a hero who never walked away." The audience rose in applause. He, watching from the back in a paint-stained shirt, wiped his face with his sleeve. The emotion poured out quietly, like always. He never asked for anything. He only gave. And now, finally, it was all coming back. Not in wealth, but in honor. His daughter, now in her junior year of high school, won an award for an essay on figures of resilience. She wrote about him, about how a man once labeled a failure became the foundation of a community. Her story went viral, read on the radio, shared across social media. Strangers who had never set foot in their neighborhood cried as they read. Because it wasn't just his story, it was the story of thousands who had been abandoned, humiliated, dismissed, and still got up. The difference? He rose in love. The youngest, now a teenager, wanted to be a social worker. "I want to fix people the way Dad fixes houses," he said. He was the most sensitive, always writing, always watching. He saw the pain, but he also saw the poetry. And the greatest poem of all was watching his father turn ruins into refuge, not with speeches but with bricks, with gestures, with presence, with example. She, somewhere across the city, was no longer remembered. Her absence had faded into the scenery. No one asked, no one searched, and he never spoke her name again. Not out of resentment, but because she simply no longer belonged in the story. He chose to continue. Her memory was faint now, like a forgotten shadow in a room that's never opened. That chapter was over, healed, closed. Now it was nothing more than a backdrop, a muted canvas behind the masterpiece being painted anew. The project had begun receiving donations from companies. The space expanded. They built a library, a music room, a community garden. Each new room was named after a value: resilience, truth, love, hope. He never chose the names. He let his children decide. Because what he wanted most was that, for them to take the lead, to carry the mission forward. He didn't need trophies. He only needed to see that his love had become legacy. One day, during a community circle at the center, a young mother asked him, "Mr. Stone, have you ever thought about starting over with someone else, building a new life?" He smiled, looked at his children from across the yard and said, "I did start over. I rebuilt my entire life. It's all right there." And he pointed to them. The words hung in the air like a blessing, like a lesson. Because yes, he had started over, and now he was exactly where he belonged, at the summit of dignity. What was once pain had become foundation. What was once abandonment had become protection. And what was once silence had become applause. But the greatest applause didn't come from others. It came from within, because he knew what he had faced. He knew who he had been, and now he knew without doubt who he had become. It was late afternoon when he received the invitation that would change everything. A successful businessman in the construction industry had visited the center out of curiosity and left stunned. He wanted to turn it into a national model. "What you've built here, Mr. Stone, needs to be multiplied. Are you in?" He didn't answer right away. He thought of his children, his routine, their roots, but the man's eyes were honest. He didn't want to take anything away. He wanted to expand it. And for the first time, Stone saw it could be even bigger. The offer was clear: financial support, professional structure, expansion to other cities. But there was one condition. Stone would have to be the face of the project. Record videos, join campaigns, attend events. That part made him uneasy. He had never wanted attention. But his oldest son pulled him aside and said, "Dad, you've done so much in silence, now let the world hear it." And for the first time, he said yes. His first trip was to the capital. He stayed in a modest hotel, brought the kids with him. At every meeting, every speech, every interview, he told his story with the same humility. And wherever he went, he left people in tears. Because it was truth. It was raw pain turned into power. Abandonment turned into purpose, and the more he shared, the more people wanted to help. The movement grew, the project became a national reference, and just as he reached that peak, she came back. But now, she wore a different face, humbled, worn, but more calculating. She had seen the headlines, watched the videos with millions of views. She wrote a letter, then sent an email. Eventually, she got the number for the new headquarters and called. "I don't want anything," she said. "Just a conversation. I want to ask for forgiveness. Face to face." He listened in silence, then simply replied, "I'm not the same man, and you're no longer part of this story." She tried appealing to the children, traveled to the new city, waited for hours. She was greeted politely by the assistant who said, "They asked me to thank you, but they prefer to keep their distance." Frustration turned to despair. She realized she hadn't just lost a family. She had lost the right to be in any chapter that followed. She was now a memory, a shadow, a warning of what happens when you choose the false glow over true light. That night, at the largest award ceremony of the year, he took the stage of a packed theater, a national tribute to the man who rebuilt hope. The audience stood, applauding. His children were in the front row, tearful and proud. He took the microphone and said, "I didn't do this alone. I carried 3 pillars with me, and each of them held me up through the hardest days. A father is made of love, but also of choice, and my choice was to never abandon, even after I had been left behind." Outside, in the middle of a noisy crowd, she watched from a screen, in the corner of a bar, on a borrowed phone, hands trembling, face wet with tears. It was as if every word was a mirror, not of his glory, but of her absence. She didn't see a man glorifying himself. She saw the man she had once discarded, becoming everything she once dreamed of, but never had the courage to build. And now, none of it mattered, because he had become too great to return, and she, too small to follow. Life had gone full circle, and in its turn, she was left behind. He, the man once called a failure, was now a symbol of resilience, not because he got rich, not because he was on TV, but because he did what few ever do. He stayed, and those who stay, win. And the greatest turning point of all, it wasn't the fame, it wasn't the awards, it was this, looking at his children and seeing in them the man he always dreamed of being. The greatest victory was right there. No gold, no headlines, just truth. After the award ceremony, the nights became quieter. Not because applause had faded, but because peace had finally taken root inside him. For the first time in many years, he slept without a weight on his shoulders, without fear of tomorrow, without the word failure echoing through his mind. What remained now was the echo of voices he had helped lift, of stories that had crossed his path, of children who had grown up strong, dignified, loving. The world had recognized him, but more importantly, he had recognized himself. The project kept growing. New branches, new neighborhoods, new lives touched. Each new space carried a piece of him, an unspoken lesson, a trace of memory, a quiet teaching. His children, now adults, had taken on more responsibility. One managed the technical side, another handled the education programs. His daughter led the initiatives for women and children. It was as if everything had been written from the start. Only instead of ink, it had been penned in tears, and instead of paper, faith had held it all together. One day, at one of the centers, a boy asked him, "Mr. Stone, were you ever afraid you wouldn't make it?" He paused for a moment, then replied, "Every single day. But fear isn't a reason to stop. Fear only shows you where courage needs to act." The boy smiled, and in the boy's eyes he saw reflections of his own children years ago. Small, scared, needing everything. Now they were men, a woman, grown, whole. Time hadn't just passed, it had transformed. One quiet afternoon he sat with his 3 children on the porch of the original house, now restored, solid, alive. They drank simple coffee, ate warm bread, and laughed freely. His daughter asked, "Dad, if she had stayed, would we have made it here?" He thought for a moment, looked at the 3 of them, and answered calmly, "Maybe not. Sometimes pain teaches what comfort hides." And silence settled, not of sadness, but of understanding, because now, even the absence made sense. She, on the other side of the city, was aging in a shelter. She wasn't starving, but everything that feeds the soul was missing. Companionship, love, respect. She watched the man she left behind on TV, listened to reports of his work. She tried to justify her past, tried to convince herself she couldn't have known. But deep down, she did. She had made the wrong choice, and the world kept spinning without her, because the love she abandoned had bloomed in fertile soil, and no regret could undo that. He didn't hate her, but he didn't see her either. She was a closed chapter, a page turned sharply but without bitterness. When someone asked about her, he'd simply say, "I wish her peace, that's all." He didn't need to say more. Life had already done the showing, not with shouting, not with revenge, but with fruit, and the fruit was right there, around the table, laughing, growing, multiplying the good that once had been planted by his hands alone. The community center now bore his name, Rocha Institute of Hope. It had been his children's idea. He resisted as always, but gave in, moved by the emotion in their eyes. At the inauguration of the new headquarters, dozens of people paid tribute, but the greatest gift came from a little boy, the son of one of the program's participants. He handed him a drawing with a simple sentence scrawled in big letters, "You're the father of all of us." He held the paper carefully, like something sacred, because it was. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about what he represented, about what he built, even after being told he was nothing, about how a man can fall and still rise higher than anyone imagined. And in that moment, amid held-back tears and honest applause, he understood. His story didn't end with him. It was just beginning, in others. And maybe that was the most beautiful kind of justice, the kind that doesn't wound, that doesn't shout, that simply shows with time that the good we plant always comes back. And when it returns big, it returns strong, it returns as legacy. It was a Sunday morning when he woke up earlier than usual. The sun poured through the window, warming the floor where he once slept, curled up beside his children, under the crushing weight of abandonment. Now that same floor was clean, alive, filled with simple furniture chosen with care. He looked around and breathed deeply. His world no longer revolved around pain. It revolved around what he had built from it, a home, a legacy. He walked out to the porch, where the smell of fresh coffee was already in the air. His daughter was setting the table, his sons were discussing a new expansion for the project. Life moved forward, and now finally he could just watch it unfold. For the first time he felt allowed to rest. There was nothing left to prove, not to anyone, not even to her, especially not to her. The world had already judged, already rewarded, and she had received her part. The silence of being erased. She, now ill, fragile, her voice almost gone, sent one last letter, written in shaky handwriting full of apologies, regret, begging for one final conversation. She said she just wanted to see him one last time, to say a real goodbye. He read it in silence, folded the paper gently, thought of his children, of the journey, of the nights with rice and hot water, of the old note that life itself had already torn apart. And he answered with just one sentence, "You already had your goodbye. When you closed that door." She never replied. There was nothing left to say. On the other side of life, she finally understood. Some choices carry consequences no amount of time can heal. Some doors, once closed, never open again. And that was her punishment. Not through shouting, not through revenge, but through absence. An absence heavier than any punishment. In the community, the institute kept growing. The walls echoed with laughter, with tears of healing, with stories being rebuilt. Teenagers who once sold drugs now led workshops. Mothers who once wanted to give up now mentored others. Everything revolved around what he had built, not with money, but with surrender, with pain turned into purpose. At a special event honoring the project, he was asked to record a final message on video for future generations. He sat in front of the camera, adjusted the microphone and said, "If someone left you, that doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you've got something powerful to build, without the one who held you back. Use the pain as bricks. Use the absence as your foundation. And never, ever let someone else's choice define your worth." The recording spread across the country. It became a book, a lecture, a lesson. But he never changed. He still walked the streets of the neighborhood, still helped carry bags, still swept the front of the institute, still wore that same calm gaze. When someone called him a hero, he'd simply smile and say, "I just stayed when she left." Because that was his weapon, his strength, his triumph. Years later, on his headstone, by his children's decision, no titles were carved, no list of achievements. Only one sentence: "Here lies a man who never gave up." And in the hearts of all who crossed his path, the name Stone was no longer just a name. It became a symbol. Stone, the one who didn't break, who didn't bend, who held everything up, who turned abandonment into foundation, pain into a bridge, and silence into an eternal answer. His story didn't end with reconciliation. It didn't end with the return of the one who despised him. It ended with justice, with dignity, with redemption. Because in the end, he didn't win to prove anything to her. He won to show his children that real love never abandons, and when it endures, it builds something not even time can erase.